Everybody, welcome back to the High Performance Zone. We tap into the concept of fear on this one. Actually, though, we call it unfear. Not we. This is actually the authors of the new book, Unfear, which is how to transform an organization through breakthrough performance and well-being. And this are my two new good friends, Gaurav, G-Man, we'll just call you G-Man, and Mark, we're going to call you CrossFit, McKinsey consultants who have started an organization now that really taps into how do we overcome the fear in organizations, in our individual. And this is an inside look for an outward result. This is how we transform ourselves, then our teams, and then the whole system. Really enjoyed this. We go deep, enjoy this. Also, you know, what I'm thinking about is the 30% critical energy theory. That is the idea that if we can get 30% of energy, that we can transform a whole system. And 30% energy doesn't mean 30% of the people. It means energy. Stand by, ready, hit it. Hey, everybody. So today we're talking about fear, actually unfear, how to get unfear, unstuck within an organization and yourself. And I have two of the world's experts on that. We now have a new call sign, G-Man, for Gaurav. And we got it. All right. And then also CrossFit for Mark. But Mark and Gaurav, welcome to the High Performance Zone.
Hey, thanks, John.
Great to be here.
Yeah, awesome. You know, it's our first time where we're doing multiple people, three of us on one thing. So this is going to be fun. I can't wait to dive in. First off, though, let's go right with the title of the book, because it's such a powerful title, To Unfear. What does that mean to you guys?
Absolutely. Well, I'll take a stab at it. So Gaurav came up with the term. I fought it, you know, for the longest time because for some reason, I didn't feel like we should just make up a word, you know, we should just speak in plain language. But after we went through a number of book titles, we eventually landed back on Unfear. But Unfear, you know, speaks to the core idea in our book, which is that fear itself isn't the problem. You know, we didn't call it fearless. We call it unfear because fear is to be human. It's just part of our experience. And it's more about how we relate to fear that makes the difference. So if we can see fear as a cue for learning and growth, you can make amazing new things happen despite the stresses and challenges of you know, our various life situations.
Perfect. G-Man, since you came up with the title, what were you thinking?
What I was thinking was exactly what Mark said, that there's nothing in the English language that describes what we were trying to explain. So we decided to create our own word. Right? What else do you do when there's something that doesn't exist? And as Mark said, we're not saying that you have to reduce fear or become fearless.
Right.
I don't know if I've met anyone in the world who's completely fearless.
Right.
To me, there are two kinds of people. People who collapse when they face fear, and people who face the fear, ask the question, what is it trying to teach me? And then move forward. Especially when it's got to do with fear that's not to do with your physical survival,
right?
But more important, emotional fear, like when the boss shouts at you or something. What do you do with that? How do you engage with it? And when you can engage with it in a productive way, you drive both performance and well-being. And that is at the core of the human condition. How do we create well-being and performance?
Yeah, I love, and that's the subtitle of your book. And I love that you talk about both, right? And we'll dive into that. It's the performance and the well-being. And I'm very anxious to hear what well-being means to you guys and how you define that and how you work with it. But let's stick on the fear for a second thing. I love, G-Man, thank you, by the way, for that going into the emotional side, because I think there's different types of fear, right? And maybe let's dive into that for just a second. Let's define fear first, and then we'll get into the unfear. So we started down that path, but maybe Mark, maybe you want to go next. What is the, how do you define fear and in the book, and how do you do it with your clients? And how do you then go to get them unstuck or unfear?
Yeah, there's a couple ways a couple levels of fear, but you know, the basic definition of fear is, you know, the emotion we experience when we perceive a threat.
Okay.
Yeah. And, you know, those
so
threats
it's an emotion.
It's an emotion, but it also translates into patterns of behavior.
Okay.
And so, oftentimes it's hard for people to be in touch with their fears, right? We all have these deep, common fears, just as human beings, fear of being hurt, fear of not belonging, fear of failure and rejection. But we also talk about the patterns of behavior. We describe them as the fear archetypes. So the ways in which fear shows up in your life or on teams and in organizations. But yeah, fear is essentially just an emotion that's based on the perception of a threat. And we can get into, the perception piece of that, because that's where it gets tricky, right? There's physical threats, which are, real and imminent. There's something that may hurt our physical bodies, but then we have emotional threats, which are all the other things that, have to do with the stories that we tell ourselves about what's going on.
And in your guys' work with so many organizations, what do you find is the fear that is really prevalent out there? What is it?
So there are a couple that come up. I think the number one is fear of failure.
Okay.
There is an obsession that people have with failure being a bad thing, because there are all kinds of assumed repercussions that happen when you fail. So fear of failure is one. The fear of being marginalized, which is similar to fear of failure, is another. And then the third one is the fear of being disliked. It's amazing how much people in organizations have this huge fear of being disliked, and that is at the root of a lot of behaviors which are non-productive.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Mark, anything you want to add on that? Because it's at the core.
Yeah, the thing I would add to that is there's all kinds of fears that we experience. A lot of people, believe that you have to almost check your emotions at the door. That's one thing that I was taught to, make my way in the world as a man, a competitive guy who was going to win. You had to check your emotions at the door and just sort of, be a tough guy in the world. But
did
beneath
that come
all that,
from your upbringing in the family, or also socially? I know, by the way, you went to Naval Academy, class of 99. Thank you very much. Go Navy.
You got it. Yeah. Go Navy. What, you're class 82, is that?
Yeah. 82.
All right.
So
Right
we'll dive into that. And you're an engineer.
Cool.
Did you do, which engineering did you do?
I was systems engineering.
Oh, you did systems. Yeah. You're smarter. I did Mech E. The system stuff was a little challenging for me, but that's what you guys teach now. So it's cool.
That's it.
But let's go back to, so this idea of what you're talking about, I actually think that you can flip it. And that's where I hear what you're talking about. There's actually strength and vulnerability. So, but it's not necessarily what the world tells us, right? So where did that shift in your background? I mean, you started with, hey, I was taught this is what I was supposed to do, right?
Yeah, I'm still working on it. Frankly, it's happened relatively later in my life. I grew up, I think I was just a competitive kid. My younger brother was, he's a year and a half younger than me. We're actually quite close, but he was physically bigger than me. He was like the basketball, baseball star, and I was a skinny kid, still athletic, but I struggled to, be a standout in sports as he was. And people thought my younger brother was older than me. So that just fired me up. My dad's an engineer, is not a very emotionally expressive guy. My mother is. And so I sort of came to, associate manliness with being, sort of stoic or stoical and, not expressing emotion. Anger was okay, but other emotions were not. And so then joining the Navy and being at the Naval Academy, there was also the sense of don't show weakness, don't be emotional. You got to be kind of cool-headed at all times. And so I think that played into a story that I couldn't really share my emotions. I couldn't really be in touch with the things that created fear for me. And so I just pushed all that stuff down, but it came out in my behaviors. The competitive angle or orientation to life served me in some ways, but it also became very dysfunctional. And I would say later in life, when I became a consultant, I started working with Gaurav, I've started to unearth and, peel back these layers, but it's a process.
Right. I want to dive into more of the behaviors soon, but Gaurav, over to you. What's your background? And, how did, I know you both were met at McKinsey. We'll talk about that some more, but let's go even before that. What was your childhood like and your relationship to fear?
Yeah, so my childhood was the best way to describe it is was complicated. Um, and complicated not because of parental issues. My parents were exceptionally loving parents.
Hmm.
But I grew up as a kid in India being having two challenges. One was at the age of 2, I developed squint and I have had glasses since the age of 2,
Mm.
which meant that I was always the butt of jokes and I was called four-eyed and this and that and the other, which meant that I had to work extra hard to prove myself all the time. And the other one was that I was left-handed. And
Oh,
again, in India, left-handed is the hand of the devil.
wow.
And to begin with, even my parents tried to change me from being left-handed, and the doctor told them, don't do that. But being left-handed, wearing glasses, and growing up, kids can be
Mm.
really cruel. So on the one hand, I had this almost like, you know, everything in life is about proving myself, and that I was a different kid, and everyone used to kind of laugh. And on the other hand, I had my parents who were exceptionally supportive. And in the midst of all of this, I had to figure out who was I going to be.
Right.
And I think to begin with, not surprisingly, it was quite a messy discovery, but over time it evolved and I'm happy to talk about it. But for the most part, I think like Mark, I was exceptionally competitive. And growing up in India with a billion people, the message was life is difficult and you have to claw your way to the top. And if you
Hmm.
don't claw your way to the top, you're irrelevant. So that's my background from where I started.
Wow, fascinating. I mean, and now I want to know how you two met because we got two different, backgrounds, right? And not
Uh-huh.
only United States, India, how we came together. Before we answer that question, though, you said the left hand is the hand of the devil. Is that when you say the devil? Because I'm just curious. India has so many. By the way, is Sanskrit the root language in India still? Is that where it came from? Your name?
Yep.
Yeah. That's why I have a hard time pronouncing it. But I
Uh,
love G-Man because that's a cool name in the US, by the way. That's so you've gone from Four Eyes to G-Man.
all
That's cool.
right. I like that.
But tell me more about the philosophy of the left-handedness in India. When you say the devil, I mean, I didn't think Christianity was like maybe it's not Christianity. So tell me, what does that really mean if you're left-handed in India?
So the word used is shaitan, which is actually an Arabic word.
Okay.
And shaitan is uh, that thing that sits on the back of your shoulder and tells you to do all those bad negative things.
Oh,
And
okay.
it often sits on your left shoulder,
I
right?
see.
And therefore the left hand is the hand of the shaitan. And,
Oh,
and obviously the other thing is because in India, and this is now getting into hygiene and stuff, but
yeah. It's
being
how
left
you
hand,
go to the
right?
bathroom, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So that because
Yeah.
there was no toilet paper, none of that stuff, the left hand was supposed to be dirty and unhygienic and all of
Yeah.
that stuff as well.
Yeah. Interesting how culture can put a label on so many
Absolutely.
things, right? It's crazy.
Absolutely.
I'm
Um,
learning new stuff here. This is great. I didn't
yeah,
realize that
good.
about left-handedness in India, but awesome.
Yeah, boy, I tell you, there's cultures, Mark, as you know it, and G-Man knows for sure. You have to be aware, right, of
Yep.
like shaking, touching someone with their left hand in India can be a real insult, right? I mean, they may not want to do that, right? And like,
Yeah.
soles of your feet in Asia, right? You don't want to
Yep.
put the soles of your feet. What are some other cultural things that you guys have are aware of?
So I
What
mean,
not to do?
a good example in India is if you ever touch your book with your feet or it falls on the ground,
Oh,
you take your hand, you touch your book and bring it to your forehead because knowledge is a sign of God.
oh.
And disrespecting knowledge is a big no-no. So if you ever touch it with your feet or it falls to the ground, you have to acknowledge that you've done something wrong and that you have to give knowledge back the respect that it deserves.
Beautiful. Yeah, I've seen that on spiritual journeys too. You take a spiritual book and you have to mount it on something, put it on something. You can't let it touch the floor.
Yeah,
But
but
this, you're
even your
saying
school
any
books,
book.
you have to do it
Any,
with your school books, everything.
wow. That's cool. All right. Anything else, Mark, that you know, and then I want to go to behaviors.
Yeah, I mean, there's interesting, I've similarities across cultures, but also some interesting differences. I've been in some cultures, in Europe, where if you argue with someone in public, it's a real, it's a sign of disrespect.
Okay.
In some places in the Middle East as well, but I found myself at a consulting engagement in Israel one time, and it was very much expected that you argue with people in public very aggressively. So I actually found it easy to work in that culture because, if people were challenging you, you fight right back in public, and people were like, okay, I respect you now. But I tried to do that in other places, and people just shut down and they don't like you after that. So I've sort of learned to be attuned.
You see what I have to deal with? You see what I have to deal with?
I can only imagine. I can only imagine. And being partners too. Yeah, that's a challenge. That's really cool. Let's do this. Let's talk about behaviors. And then I want to go back to your relationship, because I think there's some power there with Mackenzie and all that. But I want to hit with the behaviors right away. So, Mark, you mentioned that there's certain behaviors that happen with fear, right? What are those?
Yeah, they fall in two categories. We call them the fight club and the nice club.
Okay.
And these, depend on, what sort of reaction you have in the face of your fear. So the fight club, they see threats and they say, look, in order to stay safe in the world, I need to fight. I need to stand out and prove to the world that I'm special. And if I'm special, I'm safe.
That's your Israel example, right?
Yeah.
I mean, someone challenges you, you come right back. Yeah. Russia, by the way, has that culture too. When I took the Blue Angels to Moscow in 92, I was surprised that initially that was a show of strength, is to, butt heads, right?
Yeah. Yeah. In some cultures, and even, certain industries like the financial industry, for instance, across the world, they celebrate this sort of, this fighting energy. But there's 4 archetypes in there: the perfectionists, the competitors, the controllers, and the fault finders. So these are, the patterns of behavior that, I stand out, and this is how I stay safe in the world. And, there's good intentions behind all of those, good values, but sometimes a strength overplayed becomes a weakness. And so they create a lot of dysfunction. And then on the nice club, we have the likable. So these are people that, try to make friends with everyone. We have the sticklers, we have the minions, and we have the avoiders. So those are the patterns of behavior. We can dive into, these in various ways, but, there's oftentimes, as individuals, we're sort of a mix of these patterns, and teams as well are a mix, and organizations have a mix as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. But essentially, John, the point of all of these behaviors is a story in our head that when we experience fear, we need to protect ourselves and we need to be safe.
Right.
And whatever it takes to be safe and to be productive in that moment is what I'm going to do, however dysfunctional it might be in the long run.
Right.
And that is the assumption from this. All of this happens. And what it prevents us from doing is to look at the fear and say, you know what? There is wisdom in this fear. It's teaching us something. Because when you do that, then you have a new set of behaviors. Right? You get much more achievement-oriented. You get much more creative and much more innovative. You become much more of a coach, and you are much better at building trust on teams. So the same stimulus can lead to completely different behaviors, whether you are in a protection mode or in a curiosity mode. Yeah. In fact, one of the interesting things we say in our work is don't get mad, get curious.
Nice.
Because when you're curious, you have possibilities open to you. When you're mad, all you can think of is, how do I protect myself?
Yes. Yeah. Well, I'm thinking of that analogy of two sides to the same coin, right? Or perception, right? So glass half full, glass half empty. Same outside event, different perceptions, right? Or the idea of, what's the classic one in Chinese? Threat or chaos, right? Threat or opportunity.
It's danger or opportunity. It's a Wei Ji.
What's it called? Wei Ji?
Wei Ji. Yeah.
Wei Qi. You're going to be my language professor. I'm getting better on that. But I love where we're going on this, because I believe deeply that the world is coming from us, not at us, which is a very deep point, very deep in the spiritual teachings, right? And so this idea of fear, even, protection, I have to protect, that's an outside force, right? That you're projecting on. And in reality, I think it could be a misperception, right? So what do you guys think?
There are a couple of thoughts on this, John, which are really important. I'm glad that you went there. Well, often we don't in podcasts go there.
Yeah.
So one of the big questions to ask is, am I an outcome of my life, or am I the cause of it? Right? And obviously, like you, we believe that we are the cause of our life rather than the outcome of it. But I think more fundamentally, there is an idea that, which is at the core of fear, which is that we are all limited and we are constrained, and we are limited and constrained because all we are is our body-mind complex, right? Body-mind-emotion complex.
Right.
And one of the big ideas in the book, which is the starting point of big book, is actually we are not limited.
Nice.
We have infinite potential. And what we do is we create stories through our enculturation, through our life experiences, that make us start believing that we are limited.
Right.
One of the starting points of Unfear is, how do you reconnect with this place of being infinite potential?
Oh, nice.
And that's at the core, and that's how I got into this work, in fact. And the big thing we say is that human beings have two superpowers. One is imagination, and the other is the power to tell stories.
Oh, good.
And so the same event, as you said, you can imagine as something that is a possibility imagination or a limiting imagination.
Right.
And then all the stories we repeat after that are a direct consequence of it. And think about all the division that is there in society. It's based in the same event being seen and imagined differently by the different divisions. And then you create a story about how everyone else is wrong and we are right.
Yeah. Wow. Let's keep going on this, because I'm glad that we bumped into what is a core topic, right? And that is, the idea of either limiting or unlimited, right? And this idea of story, because a lot of good research coming out of Stanford about the narrative side of a story, even on gratitude. I was just on a podcast with Jill Ellis, who's the winningest soccer coach in the world for the US. And she took 2 World Cup championships and all that. And we were talking about this idea of limiting, or unlimiting beliefs, right? So let's go a little bit further on that with the narrative or the storytelling. How do those stories get built? And then how do you undo, or even more importantly, how do you create, as you were saying, a positive story? How do you guys teach that?
Mark, you want to go for it?
Yeah. So I'll start with kind of how do these stories get created? It's just our various life experiences. Our brain has this, this negativity bias where we treat negative experiences like Velcro, right? They just stick to us and we remember those things. And positive experiences, our brain treats like Teflon. We experience this nice high, but it just sort of, slips away, and we don't necessarily have as strong access to those memories. And so over time, we remember these negative experiences, and we start to see these threats in the environment. We don't want to repeat those negative experiences. Mm-hmm. And so we have, this conditioning over life. So for me, for instance, I saw this, I was afraid of failing, and I experienced, some deep hurt when I, didn't do well somewhere. If somebody thought my brother was the cooler kid or the older, brother, when I was actually the older brother, I felt disrespected, and I didn't want to repeat those same experiences. And so I started to compete and see, all these threats in the world. And I developed this story that if I was winning, I was going to keep myself safe and, avoid those negative experiences that I had. So everyone has these sorts of processes going on throughout our life. And that's just how we come to embrace these stories. And we're often blind to the process. It just happens sort of in the background, almost subconsciously. And we start to have that. So that sort of gets to the next process, which is awareness. And so, Gaurav, I'll sort of pass it over to you, where you can kind of talk about, how we learn.
Sure. I mean, so just to build on what Mark was saying, that ultimately it's all neuroplasticity, right?
Yeah.
Which is basically whatever you repeat to yourself becomes your belief and your truth. So if I've grown up believing that life is a competition and it's super hard, everything will come to me and I will see it as being super hard.
Yes.
Right? And the more you walk down the path, it's like, if you're in a garden and you keep walking down the same path again and again, you start creating a path. The way you break it is by actually creating a new story. But for you to create a new story, the first thing you need to do is you need to be aware that you are walking down a story rather than something that is the truth. And it becomes a really difficult conversation because people say, what do you mean it's not the truth? Of course it's the truth. And you're like everyone else, you're fake news and all of that stuff.
I have to be this way.
Yeah, I have to be this way, right? So the first thing is to create awareness in helping people understand that they have choice when an event happens. And that the past is not an accurate predictor of the future. In fact, one of the big ideas we talk about is the way we live our lives is we are driving down the highway of life and we're trying to predict what's going to happen in the future by looking in the rear view mirror. And not only that, the rear view mirror is smeared with peanut butter. So we can't see it clearly and we keep moving forward. So how do we create space for people to slow down and understand that they have choice? And one of the things we teach people is how do you create awareness, and then how do you create a pause that allows you the option of going in different directions.
Okay, so give me an example of how you teach that, because this is big stuff, right? So how do you actually work with organizations?
Yeah, so think about, so suppose there's a situation where Gucci is driving down the road, and Gucci, you suddenly get, bam, you're slowing down and suddenly someone cuts in front of you, jumps the traffic light and goes off. And what happens? Immediately, what's the reaction? For most normal people, it is that you curse or you swear or you get upset and you get really worked up. Why? Because there's something called the amygdala hijack, which is your emotional brain that kicks in immediately to say, to survive, you have to immediately either fight or you flight, right? But the first conversation we have with people is that when it's an emotional threat, it's not a threat to your physical body. So the amygdala hijacking your brain is not good enough. And that if you can give yourself a pause of somewhere between 8 to 10 seconds, then you have the ability for your neocortex to kick in and for you to be able to ask a question to yourself in terms of, why is this happening? Or what other choice can I make? Or what can I learn from it? Right? So it's all about learning. But then the question is, how do you give yourself that pause? The first thing is you need to understand where in your body do you feel that emotion? Right? So that's one piece of it, which is in the moment, how do you create pauses by recognizing and then giving yourself time before you react.
Where did you get the 8 to 10 seconds? I find that interesting because I totally get the idea of stimulus and response, right? Bam, stimulus hits you. There's a response that's emotional. And so where'd the 8 to 10 seconds come from?
So in times of threat, what happens is that when you see something, you taste something, you touch something, you hear something, everything goes to the thalamus and the thalamus is like a switching station, and it sends signals to different parts of your brain. And there's research that's been done which says the thalamus, when it sends under threat, when it sends a signal to your neocortex, it takes 8 to 10 seconds for the neocortex to form a full picture of what's going on. In the meantime, your amygdala, which is like a radar for danger, is ready to act.
Yeah.
And the way that acts is it looks like, it feels like, and it goes into your past and your fears from the past, like when my dad screamed at me, or when I fell down, or when someone pushed me in the playground, and you boom, try and protect yourself against that.
Yeah.
So it requires that 8 to 10 seconds. But there's another piece to it, which, think about it, John, which is What if we can remove those memories that we have in our head, which is the reference point for the amygdala? So the longer term solution is mindfulness and meditation practices, which allow us to clean up the gunk that is there in our nervous system, which is the reactive place from where we do these reactive behaviors when faced with fear.
Ah, beautiful. So I've studied some meditation a little bit in different areas. Obviously, from India, there's a deep tradition in meditation. So do you all teach meditation? Tell me how do you teach it to the business world, the mindfulness, the meditation?
So, Mark, you want to go? You want me to go?
You go. So I'm a relatively newer adherent to meditation. But Gaurav, you've been teaching this for a little bit longer, so you go for it.
Yeah. So Sean, I started doing this work in the early 2000s, and when we started, people you said meditation, and in business settings, they would say, "What the hell is wrong with you?"
Right.
Fortunately, now it's actually much more easily accessed.
Exactly.
And people are much more open to the idea. But the way we introduce people to meditation is through science.
Oh, beautiful.
And what we do is we talk to people about how our different brain waves are there. And what meditation allows us to do is it goes from our busy brain waves to the ones which are much more theta and delta, which are all about memory and intuition and all of that stuff. And we explain how meditation, when you do meditate, it actually releases the stress from our nervous system. So when you give people access into science as an explanation that leads people in, they are much more open to try it.
Yes.
And when they try it, they immediately sense that there's something different. And that's how I got hooked into this space. When I started in 2001, I went in thinking this is all, forgive the language, BS, right? And I went and said, man, this is touchy-feely stuff. What's wrong with McKinsey?
Yeah. So McKinsey was actually into this around 2000?
Yes.
Oh, that's great.
And I went into this workshop, kicking and screaming, complaining, and I went into a meditation. And what happened was I suddenly felt like I was vibrating. And even post meditation, I couldn't stop vibrating. So I'd left India rejecting all of this, and I'm in South Africa, and I experienced this. And I go to this woman who did it, and I say, what have you done to me? And she brought the energy down, and she said, this is your life force. And your experience, your life force rise. And it helped me understand there were things that I didn't understand about life.
Yeah.
There were many more powerful ideas. And so I said, okay, 4 months, I'll figure it out, and boom. And that 4 months has turned into 20 years.
What is your practice right now? What's your meditation practice now?
So my meditation practice involves doing meditation twice a day, 20 minutes in the morning, 20 minutes in the evening.
Okay.
But I meditate with a mantra. So I meditate on sound.
Beautiful.
Different people, what we teach in our workshops is much more just noticing your breathing, because that's the first step. But now I'm meditating on sound.
And this is the sound of the mantra as you're saying it?
Exactly. So you notice both your breathing and the mantra, because the mantra allows for energy to unlock much faster than just noticing your breathing.
Right. Absolutely. What mantra do you use, or is it secret?
Yeah, unfortunately, my teacher has always told us that your mantra is specific to you, so you can't really share it.
Okay. But how do you come up with one then? From a teacher, they give you one? Is it unique to every individual?
Absolutely. It's unique to every individual, depending on, what their Kundalini and their chakras, how they are working.
Yeah. So the Kundalini, the energy in our inner channels. Awesome. We're going to talk more about this, but I want to go back to McKinsey real quick, because I want to stay on the business side real quick. And that is, where did you guys meet? I know I looked at your backgrounds, and you both were at McKinsey at the same time. So give our audience a little bit of the background of where you met. Like, first off, I had no clue Mackenzie was into the meditation in 2000. I know right now it's a big thing, and it has been for the last 3 or 4 years. We can actually use the word meditation as compared to mindfulness, right? And you can do the things that you all are doing in workshops, which is super cool, right? I do a focus exercise now with my teams, right? Very much, it's just the basics of meditation, well, with some visualization and stuff. But talk to me about your guys' background and what you're doing now with the company.
Go for it, CrossFit.
Yeah, you got it. Thanks, G-Man. Yeah, so Gaurav and I met 10 years ago. I was still at McKinsey and Company. I was in the operations practice, and I was doing a lot of the a lot of work in operational excellence and lean transformation. So, how do you improve, the nuts and bolts of organizations, and how do you make things work more efficiently? And Gaurav was working at the same client. He had recently left McKinsey and Company to start Co-Creation Partners. And, I heard about this guy from McKinsey who was coming in to run these mindset workshops.
Oh, really?
In
so
parallel,
you started with mindset workshops.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Keep going.
And so I was doing this hardcore lean stuff, and I heard about this guy who's going to be doing these woo-woo mindset workshops and potentially talking about meditation. And I was like, who is this joker? He couldn't hack it at McKinsey. He had to go and start his own thing. He's doing this, this soft, mindset stuff. I was like, I need to go into this workshop to check up on this guy and make sure he's not going to screw up my project. And so I joined this workshop, highly skeptical, but open-minded. And through that, I discovered, wow, like this is sort of a missing piece. I was always, paying lip service to mindsets and behaviors in organizations, but I always felt like we didn't really nail it. We talk about it, but I would come back to clients after 6 or 12 months and see that all these brilliant ideas we had just didn't stick. And so in the mindset work that Gaurav was doing, I saw this missing piece to this systems puzzle. And so we became fast friends. We kept in touch. When I left McKinsey a few years later, I had called him up to work on a client engagement that I was working on. And we've been partners for 7 years now.
Wow.
Gaurav, what's your version of events?
Yeah. No, that sounds pretty accurate. The only backstory to me, John, is I also was not into this stuff. I joined McKinsey as a market researcher. So hardcore quantitative stuff, SaaS, all of that stuff, and doing marketing strategy work. And when the first .com bust happened in 2001, I was in New York, and I was scared that there wasn't going to be any work for me. And one of my mentors had just moved to South Africa. Oh. And he said, hey, come to South Africa. So I moved to South Africa. And the office there wasn't doing too well. They tried everything. Nothing was working. And there was this newfound thing around mindset and culture coming in from Australia. So we decided to do it on ourselves. And again, often consultants talk about what they do with clients.
Yeah.
My reason for doing this was because it happened to me. And I became a better human being, a better husband, and a better performer at work because of the work. And because of that, I said, this is all I want to do for the rest of my life.
Wow. Okay, so I gotta know, what's the work? Give me the work of the workshop and how you take people through it, because this is powerful stuff. This mindset is powerful.
So the work is helping people understand that what they see on the outside is not enough. Okay. And that everything that is seen on the outside is conditioned by what is experienced inside and by a storyline that we have inside. So the first conversation we ever have is a conversation about transformation, right? And transformation, simply put, is not seeking out new lands, but to see with new eyes.
Oh, nice.
Right? So two people, as we said, can see completely different things because they have different set of eyes. And then it is about helping people go through a process where they understand that their comfort zone, which is bounded by fear, is not the truth. It is just their comfort zone. Right. And that most learning happens when you engage with that fear, because that's when you go into your learning zone and you stretch and push. But in order to go there, the first thing you need to understand is that you are not your thoughts, you're not your beliefs, you're not your emotions. You have thoughts, you have beliefs, you have emotions. And because you can see those emotions and thoughts, you're bigger than it. And because there's a place in you which is bigger than your thoughts and emotions, you can actually change them.
And
You can
Gaurav,
transform your thoughts.
just to jump in there real quick, we were talking about meditation, for someone who was, skeptical and somewhat new to meditation, as of say 5 years ago, that's one of the bigger insights that I've gotten is understanding, it's so easy to get fused with your thoughts and emotions. And so meditation has been that practice where I can sort of step back and, feel more that space and understand that, I'm not those thoughts and emotions. So that's really, for the listeners out there, I think it's I know a lot of people who are skeptical of meditation. I was, but that it's been a really transformational skill to have.
And Mark,
yeah, go ahead.
Well, I'm just saying, what is your meditation practice? Because a lot of people, are new to it, right? Yeah. So what do you use?
Yeah, so I, subscribe to some of what Gaurav said, but I don't do the mantra practice. I actually use some apps that are out there. One of my favorite ones is the Waking Up app. I found that to be really, really useful. And there's all kinds of different meditations on there. Vipassana meditation is one of those. But it all boils down to, just understanding that we're not our thoughts, our emotions, our sensations. We have all of that. And when you can kind of recognize that, you can kind of dissolve some of that hardened ego that we bring and, the persona that we bring into life situations and not see so many threats. And it creates, this space for much more creative, more effective, choices that you can make in life.
And is your practice?
That's what happens. Go ahead.
The Gaurav is in the morning. What is your practice in the morning and how do you do it?
So when I wake up in the morning, the first thing I do is I go sit on a chair. Very simple. Just make sure my back is supported.
Yep.
And so the first minute of the practice, all I do is I close my eyes for 30 seconds, open it halfway for 5 seconds, close my eyes for 30 seconds, open it a quarter of the way for 5 seconds. And then I go into noticing my breathing. And then I add my mantra in there. And then I run it for about 15 to 20 minutes. And at the end of it, I come out of it. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, no, I love it. Tell me about the eyes though. Why do you do the half and then the quarter?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So have you ever noticed how babies fall asleep?
No, tell me. I don't have kids yet. So I'm still working on it.
Yeah. So, but if you notice a baby, they'll go like this and then they'll open their eyes, they go down and there's actually, it's the fastest way to drop down is to open it, close your eyes 30 seconds, open it halfway, because it takes you from the brain waves of beta to alpha to theta to delta. And in a minute and 10 seconds, you can go really, really deep when you do the small opening and closing as well.
Oh, that's great. I have never heard that. That is so awesome. So again, so that I can practice it myself. So you get stable, you're straight back, get your energy, start to bring your mind in. But you actually you're focusing on your breath, right? But you close your eyes for 30 seconds, open it up to half.
Yes, for 5 seconds.
Just for 5 seconds, right? Yeah. Just to get a sense, close it down for 30 seconds, a quarter, and then you're in. Then you drop in.
Exactly.
Wow, I like that. I'll practice that tomorrow morning because I have a meditation practice every morning, and it's right after my gratitude practice. I start with gratitude, and then then I get into the meditation, which sometimes just turns into a gratitude practice, right? Yeah. But I will.
I do gratitude twice a week at night before sleeping.
You do?
Yeah, I do, because I think that's such an important practice as well.
Yeah, yeah, it plants those seeds in our brain. Where
it takes practice.
Yeah, but John, coming back to this thing, because this is just a step one meditation. The next step is, once you understand that you're not your thoughts and your feelings, now you know that you can shift them.
Yep.
So then we take people to the behavior that they are challenged by. So Mark talked to you about those behaviors. Mm-hmm. And we help people understand the beliefs, the stories that drive those behaviors, and really work with them at a deep level to understand those stories. Yeah. And help them to understand using cognitive behavior therapy What is the new story that you can create? Right? And
Yeah.
so people at least have a sense of, if I want to break my behavior pattern, I need to shift this belief from X to Y. And usually it's not like today it's this, tomorrow it's completely different. It needs to be an evolution.
Yeah.
And then we give them the practice which we were talking about of the choice, which is how do you, in those moments of fear and tension, how do you slow down so that you can actually step into the new belief versus staying into the keeping into the old belief?
Yeah.
And then everything else in the work goes from there, because then you need to learn how to engage in difficult conversations and so on and so forth. But it's a really, really powerful process that allows people to spend time with themselves for a little bit.
Yeah.
And, it's amazing when leaders go through it, they realize, oh my God, if only I had gone through this some time back, I could have been much more effective.
And we describe this as an inside out process.
Yep.
And so, oftentimes when leaders try to change an organization, they work on the outside. So they work on the strategies, the processes, the policies, and the structures. And all that is really important. It's just oftentimes all those outer elements are a reflection of, the stories and the patterns that we have as individuals. So if we start at the individual level, that cascades out to how people interrelate with each other and how teams perform. And then that cascades out into how organizations are constructed. And so that's the path that we believe that's required to create real sustainable change, not just surface level change.
Yeah. Well, I love it. And coming from McKinsey, right? I mean, this is what's cool. All right. So then how big are your initial groups? What do you like to do? How big are the workshops?
So we typically work with groups of, our ideal size is 16, but we can go up to groups of 30 when we're working with them. Okay. Again, we don't need the whole organization to be working with us. We work with the critical mass theory, which is if you can shift 30% of the energy of a system, you can shift the whole system because you can get to tipping point.
Where's that theory come from? 30%? I've heard different numbers, but that's awesome.
It's 30% of the energy. So a couple of thoughts in there. One is it's energy, not the number of people, right?
Okay.
So John, you may be in an organization and you may have much more influence than, say, I have. So you carry more energy than I do. So one of the key things is to find the people who are the key influencers in the organization. And the formal leaders are one group, but there's a bunch of informal leaders who we call troublemakers who need to be there, right?
You call them the troublemakers, huh?
Yeah,
that's great. Yeah.
Because they care. They care. Otherwise, they wouldn't be creating trouble.
Oh, that's nice.
And then 30% comes from a lot of the research that has been done around tipping point, which says that when the system gets to about 30%, is it exactly 30? Is it 28? Is it 32? Who knows?
Whatever.
But roughly it's about 30% when the system starts tipping over. In fact, if you study the metamorphosis of a butterfly, it's when the imagination cells get to about 30% is when the butterfly, when the caterpillar actually can morph into a butterfly. Before that, the antibodies just destroy the imagination cells, and it's a constant battle that happens.
Yeah. And this is related to research on how viruses are spread through a society, and also network theory and how ideas spread. So it's oftentimes anywhere from 10 to 50% of people are required for an idea to spread through a whole network, and for people to adopt new beliefs. And so the rough order of magnitude that we choose is 30%, because we've kind of found that to work in organizations.
See, John, there's my engineer for you.
I like it. Yeah.
The detail.
Yeah. And the different variables. What organizations have you had success with? Who have you worked with?
So we don't typically like to name organizations, but in the book, the one we've talked about is BASF. It's a chemical manufacturing company in Wyandotte, Michigan. We work with financial services a lot. Beautiful. We work with the federal government. We work with technology companies. We work with manufacturing. You name any place where there are human beings, this works.
Well, that's the cool part. It's universal, right? You're dealing with people, not an industry, right?
Exactly.
And do you typically like to start with the leadership, or where do you like to go?
Yeah, you need to start with the leadership. Yeah, we typically like to start with the leadership. You can create, real just bottom up efforts, but we found that it's really difficult to sustain, these sorts of change efforts if the senior leaders aren't providing some sort of air cover and are actively involved in role modeling. It's very difficult to, create an unfair team when the rest of the organization is just, completely stuck in those fear-based patterns.
No, absolutely. We've been talking a lot about your book, but I'm not sure we're talking about it different ways. So what is the framework? Because I know you all love frameworks, right? We all do, right? System engineers love frameworks. McKinsey love frameworks. People, I agree. We need a framework. What is it, the framework that you guys like to base it on?
This is an answer the engineer has to give.
Perfect. I love frameworks. Yeah, we have framework debates all the time, especially for the book. It took us quite a while to land on this, but there's sort of two dimensions to our framework. But the first is that inside out dimension that we talked about, where you start with individuals, you move to teams, and then to the organization. And then, underneath each of those levels or domains, we have mindsets, or transformational learning is how we phrase it, and action learning. So these are the deep mindset shifts. So, Gaurav talked about, just the belief that you have choice, that you don't have to show up as a knower, you can show up as a learner. These are sort of transformational mindsets that if you were to hold those, it really opens up new avenues for action. And then the action learning are all the, the skills that we talked about. And at the individual, team, and organizational level, it boils down to conversations. At the individual level, it's the conversation you're having with yourself, and whether or not you're fused to those thoughts and emotions and sensations, or if you're able to step back and sort of observe them. At the team level, the action is all about how effectively you have conversations with other people. Do you have them with respect and honesty and authenticity, or do you have them aggressively or avoid them? And then at the organizational level, it's how do you set up, systems and processes that really create a culture of learning and, continuous improvement and higher performance. So that's, there's other mindsets that sit under each of those, but it's basically that inside out and transformational learning and action learning at each of those domains.
Yeah, and at a simple level, think about it as this. You need to shift it. The work needs to happen at both a being level and a doing level.
Okay.
Some people say being is more important. Some people say doing is more important. We believe both are equally important, and you have to create shifts on both.
Okay.
And the being and doing, an individual is being and doing, a team is being and doing, and an organization is being and doing. So it's a 6-block framework that hits all of those dimensions, but it starts with the individual, then goes to the team, and then goes to the system.
Yeah. Brilliant. What would be an exercise at the team level that you would give them in order to take, to embrace the being and the doing?
Sure. Mark, you want me to go, or do you want to go?
Jump in and I'll build on it. Yeah.
So let's talk about the doing level first, and then we'll talk about the being level.
Okay.
At the doing level, there are 2 very important exercises that need to be done. One exercise is for people to connect with their individual purpose and then link that individual purpose to the team's purpose.
Okay.
So how do we create collective alignment on purpose is a really important exercise. Yeah. And we use all kinds of interesting exercises. One is called a future retrospective, which is if you look out from 2 years and say 2 years from today, if you were here, this is what success would look like, and this is what would get us excited, right? So that's one. The other exercise we get to people to do at a doing level is really practice difficult conversations. And one simple one within that is, how do you separate observation from interpretation? Okay. How do you separate observation from interpretation? So for example, John, I don't know what room you're in, but if I asked you to describe the room you're in, how would you describe it?
This is my study.
Perfect. So when you say it's your study, is that an observation or is that an interpretation?
Interpretation.
Exactly, right? Because someone else walks in and says, oh, this is his game room because he's got so many of those football helmets up there, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And often people assert their interpretations as the truth. And one of the dysfunctions that happens on teams is people assert their interpretations as the truth and they're not able to see the observation. So how do you get team members to see different observations and learn how to discern between interpretation and observation. Becomes another doing level exercise.
Yeah, well, I mean, you had me. So how do you do the next one? Because you got me going right now. This is perfect.
Right? So there's all kinds of stuff, man, like that. There's another exercise we do, which we tell people, we send half the people out of the room and the other half stay in the room, and we say to the people in the room, you're going to talk about something you're super passionate about.
Okay.
Right? And we go and tell the people outside the room that you are going to believe that these guys you are about to go and talk to are a complete waste of space. Right? And then we get them in, and suddenly the people who are talking about what they're passionate about suddenly lose their passion when they're faced with someone who thinks of them as being a complete waste of space.
Yeah.
And suddenly what you realize is it doesn't matter what the other person is saying. How I show up in a conversation actually starts negatively impacting the conversation.
Yes.
And in teams, it happens all the time. And we say, you have to prove it to us. But actually, the moment you're starting to think like that, you're negatively impacting the outcome of the conversation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? So there's all kinds of things we do with the team.
That's cool. I can see how fun this would be to go through a workshop with you guys. What do you normally do? How long is the process, the workshop, or the engagement with the client?
Mark?
Yeah, it can vary quite a bit. I mean, if we're just working with a leadership team and, helping them work through, their purpose and team dynamics and how they show up as individuals, that's often a 3 to 4 month engagement. If we're working with a larger section of the organization on how they can transform their whole culture, that could be about a year and a half. So it just depends. But then there's also, shorter, little engagements, 1-day workshops, 2-day workshops as well, for people to just dive into limited aspects of that.
Yeah, because you got to get them to buy in, right? I mean, and then they'll really embrace it. I love that we're talking about the meditation and the focus. Do you guys, back? I'm sure, Mark, you remember in the Navy the debrief process. That we would have the briefs or the debriefs. Do you guys work in the process side, and how would you do that?
We do. That's all the stuff. So now once you get out to the organizational level, that's where we help organizations get those things in place. And, to be a little bit simplistic about it, there's a few things that we help leaders get in place. One is getting the right story down. So just making sure that they're telling stories and connecting people to, this inspiring purpose rather than creating this, burning platform and, the fear-based narrative, which, works in the short term, but doesn't work in the long term. We help leaders role model the right actions. And then we also help organization improve their processes and learning routines. We kind of call them learning routines, but it's basically, the briefs, it's the debriefs, it's how they, run their operations day to day in a way that creates empowerment and participation and learning, and, gets people to try things and fail and, celebrate the little successes and continue to make progress along the way. So all of that is now possible when you have people who are showing up with this newfound, perspective on fear, with trust, the ability to have difficult conversations. It's this solid platform now on which you can build all those other routines and practices.
I love it. I love the idea of going inward first, right? And then giving them the process to build that out.
Yeah.
Rob, you said something earlier. I'm just calling you G-Man right now. Is the butterfly? It caught my attention. I did not know that the butterflies had what you call imagination genes, and so that just caught my attention. I know it's off subject, but I'm like, wait a minute, what is an imagination gene?
So here's the thing. So when a caterpillar, inherent in the caterpillar are these dormant imagination cells.
Cells. Okay.
Yeah. And genes, you can, whatever, right? And they remain dormant till the caterpillar feeds, and then it gets into the cocoon. And then these imagination cells start activating, and these imagination discs actually are basically the discs which the future butterfly is going to become. But when initially the imagination discs start getting activated, the antibodies in the caterpillar start destroying those discs. And there's actually literally a competition that happens for which part is going to overwhelm. And when the caterpillar goes into complete mush is when this ongoing drama is going on, where ultimately the imagination discs become 30% of the system, and then they start forming into the future butterfly.
Is
So
that
go ahead.
well? Make the analogy beyond the butterfly. How does that happen in humans?
Yeah, so now let's talk about an organization.
Yeah, better.
So,
Okay.
right? So in an organization, when a leader says, I want to transform the organization, you have to expect that the future is going to be in conflict with the present. And there will be people who will defend the present and negate everything you're attempting to do for the future.
Yeah.
And so the 30% we said about tipping point is how do we create a cadre of formal and informal influencers who actually hold the imagination of the future rather than are stuck in the present. Because the thing that holds an organization back is the stories about everything that they cannot do.
Yeah.
And what we are doing through our work when we're getting people to think differently is we are sparking the imagination inside of them and then collectively sparking the imagination of the organization to envision and believe in a future which is different and better and more powerful. And in that future, coming back to the well-being point, that future is not just performance oriented, it's a future that is oriented towards performance and well-being.
Yes. Okay, I love it. This is good. And the well-being part now we're kind of into, right? So remember two sides to your coin, the performance side, which I think we spent a lot of time talking about. What does well-being mean in an organization? And how do you guys teach that?
Yeah, I think it can mean a lot of different things, but there's a couple of areas that we talk about. One is just health. There's just the pure health dimension to it, and sustained stress at any level is actually detrimental to people's health and well-being. It can cause heart disease and diabetes and a variety of different things. Not to mention PTSD and other behavioral challenges. The other is just living a life that's satisfying and feeling satisfied and fulfilled at work, and discovering your happiness at work. And I know, Gaurav, you can share more about that, since that's core to more your story. But I think those are the two elements, just health and happiness, essentially. And when those two conditions are in place, there is well-being.
Yeah, just to build on that, to me, there are two fundamental pieces that lead to well-being. By the way, I don't think of well-being as work-life balance, which is what most people think about.
Okay.
To me, well-being, the word being is in there. So it's not just doing, but being, right? And human beings are in well-being when two things happen. One is when they're doing something that they're excited about, when they're working on their purpose and their meaning. So one of the big ideas for this work is how do you help people connect to meaning? And by getting people to connect to meaning, you're automatically getting them into a place of well-being, because when people are excited about what they do, they smile. They smile a whole lot more than otherwise. Like you, I can see you enjoy doing this podcast, right?
Yeah.
Therefore, it gives you energy.
Yeah,
and you're already in well-being when that happens. And the other is well-being happens when people are not wasting their time managing other people's egos. When people are not wasting time. And one of the things that we talk about in fear is we say fear is the single biggest source of waste in organizations. Because now all we're doing is managing each other's egos. We are much more worried about what can I say or what I cannot say versus being productive. And human beings actually find joy in being productive and in being meaningfully productive.
Nice.
And then there is no contradiction. And obviously then you celebrate and reward and you connect with people. But fundamentally, one of the things one of my stories is, I lived the first half of my life being joylessly successful. And once I started doing this work, I have now lived being successfully joyful.
Nice.
And I choose the second over the first anytime. And I can promise you I'm more productive when I'm successfully joyful versus when I was joylessly successful.
Yes.
So there is no contradiction in these two ideas.
No, not at all. In fact, you need them both, right? The idea of joyful effort, right? One of the perfections that you work on.
One thing we see in organizations, and one thing we're trying to combat in a way, is this belief that you either can have performance or well-being.
Right.
It's either you drive the performance and incentivize people and, they work really hard, but they're miserable, or you kind of, protect people and keep them, safe from, that sort of level of effort in some ways. But, we see that as a false choice.
Absolutely. Do you find that
human beings love working hard? Human beings love contributing.
Yeah.
Actually, I don't know any human beings who don't love contributing. When that spark gets destroyed for them is when the problems start.
Yeah. Do you find when you're working with a client, because every company needs your guys' services. I mean, it's perfect, right? Do you go in with leading with the performance side or the well-being side, or is that even a bad question?
No, it's not a bad question. I think for the most part, leaders come in with the performance side. They often come to us when there's a performance challenge.
Yep.
But there are a small number at this point, leaders who understand that even if they're performing, the organization is performing well, there's something missing.
Yeah.
And they understand that well-being is at the core of performance. But that is rare at this point.
Yeah.
It's rare. But I can see a movement happening. And I think the next generation of leaders are going to be much more seamless between these ideas versus our generation.
Yeah. And the challenge we have is there's often a time delay between, in that inside out process between the work you start to do and then the results you start to see. And so I think there's this tendency to, grab at the quick fix, let's just get it done because we need performance. But if you don't do that right, then you start to undermine well-being, and then the long-term performance starts to suffer. And so we're trying to break that cycle in most organizations, but we do have to talk about the performance angle because most organizations still have to perform, right? That's absolutely part of the equation.
Yeah, I love what you guys are seeing out there. That there's a shift now, not only in the words meditation and mindfulness, but the actual practice. But what you really said was critical there, and that is the idea of the enlightened leader, the leader going forward, right? The idea of that we have to work on well-being that will drive performance. But a lot of companies, they're already flying the airplane. The airplane's airborne, right? So we got to keep flying it as we build this new and better machine. So how do you work with that situation? I'm a leader who says, look, I agree. This is where we need to go, but we still are driving it. So how do you build the new airplane while you're flying the current one?
Yeah, I would almost admit that's happening regardless. Any organization, even a brand new organization, everyone brings their own life experiences and their conditions, to bear in that situation. So we're always trying to change, the plane while it's flying. But it gets back to that idea of, we do have this infinite potential to step back and reflect and to make different choices and to see that maybe the way we've been showing up isn't the most effective, and there is a different way, and I can practice that, and I can show up in a different, more effective way in this particular situation now. So that's what we try to help people see, and that's the core of that's where it all starts.
Yeah, but John, I'm going to challenge the analogy of the airplane. Okay. Because when you think about an airplane, you have to literally replace the old airplane with a new airplane, right?
Okay.
What I would like to think about, help people understand, is that organizations are organic. They're always evolving. And it's not a new airplane, but it's the evolution. It's the organic nature of organizations. When we get mechanistic in those definitions, we start thinking of it in a very limited way. And organizations are organic. And so it's not to tell the leader, hey, we are going to build it on the side while you're doing this. We're saying we're evolving the organization into the future. And it's all happening as the performance is going on.
Yeah. No, it's beautiful. I agree with you 100%. The idea of continuous improvement, right? So it just doesn't matter where you are, you're constantly evolving and growing. I love that. Is there any other elements of your book that we didn't cover yet? I mean, and by the way, I haven't read it yet. I can't wait to, but I've been trying to unpack it through these questions. But is there anything else you want to share with the audience on how you really do these transformations?
Yeah, one thing we didn't really talk about much are the unfear archetypes, or what we call the wise club. So we talked about the fight club, the nice club, but there's the wise club. So these are the patterns of behaviors that show up when people aren't seeing threats, but they're seeing opportunities for learning and growth. What does that look like? They're very achievement oriented. They're seekers. They're constantly improving. They're coaches. They're developing people from a place of care and compassion. And they're great team builders and trust builders. So those are sort of the patterns of behavior that tend to show up, for individuals, teams, and whole organizations. So we talked around that, but didn't get into that so specifically.
Yeah, I mean, to give people a bird's eye view of the book runs the following. The first chapter is why unfair, right? What's the theory? Why do you care? The second chapter is the biology of fear and unfair, so that to some of the questions that you were asking about, how does it work?
Yeah.
The third chapter then goes into the fear archetypes. And then the fourth chapter lays out the unfair archetypes and the model.
Oh, nice.
And then the fifth, sixth, and seventh are at an individual level, which we call, the angel in the stone is the individual transformation. The team transformation is called the jazz ensemble. And then the organization transformation is the theory, is the journey of 1,000 heroes, which basically says, do you want in your organization 1,000 children, or do you want 1,000 heroes, right? And then then at the core, at the end of it, is an example of how it all works. So that's the run of the book. The first half is about fear, the second half is about unfair, and it's really helping people get ideas. I don't think it's quite a how-to book. I think it's a philosophy book, and it's sparking some ideas, but it's not meant to be a how-to book. It's meant to have people say, man, that is challenging. Why the hell are these guys saying that? Because we want people to struggle with the book, because that's how learning happens. So it's deliberately intended to create a little bit of chaos, because chaos is a space for growth and learning.
I love it. How long did it take you guys to do the manuscript? Because I could tell this is a lifetime of lessons.
It felt like a lifetime. Felt like a lifetime. We actually wrote the book in 6 months, but that was a tough 6 months. Yeah. The slowdown with the pandemic, both helped, but I also had my girls who were 6 and 9, being homeschooled at the time. So it's hard to know what was up. But it worked out well. But as you can imagine, based on this conversation, Gaurav and I, come at this from very different life experiences and, different perspectives. So I can say our business partnership has survived the writing process, but it was a tough 6 months.
Well, I can see, that's a good partnership. You all bring different attributes to the table, right? And, getting the philosophy down and then actually, executing on it and getting it into the system, those can be two different things, right? So.
Absolutely.
Yeah. CrossFit and G-Man didn't kill each other, and that made us stronger.
There you go. What does glad to be here mean to you? Okay, we've been talking a lot. You see me wearing this shirt, by the way, and we're sending you a couple shirts. Okay, we need to get your address. So at the end of this podcast, we'll get the address. But to me, it's a philosophy. It's an ethos that encompasses what we've been talking about. This idea of operational excellence with a grateful and appreciative mindset, right? Boom, process of mindset. That's what it means to me. It's the ethos of the Blue Angels. It's the ethos of a lot of companies that I get to work with. But what does it mean to you guys? How do you see this phrase in respect to everything we just talked about?
I love that. The way it speaks to me, John, is we have a choice about how we show up. You can show up, from a place of complaining and blame, or you can show up, from a place of appreciation and gratitude. You choose. And so, I want to be glad to be here anywhere I'm at. And so I choose to be that way. And I will wear that shirt very gladly.
Beautiful. We'll get some for your daughters too. You just got to give us the size. But yes,
awesome.
I love that. The way we show up. Yeah. G-Man, what about you?
I have a more spiritual take on it. Surprise, surprise.
Yeah.
So my spiritual teacher once told me, he said, do not desire happiness, but happily desire the whole world. And what he meant by that, I think, was that when you show up with happiness is your nature. And when you're glad to be here, you're showing up with happiness. And then you can desire whatever else you want, and you can enjoy the world and all its emotions and all its craziness from that place. But if you're not happy in your nature, you will never be glad to be here, because you're always thinking about where you are not. And to be present here is to be happy. And to be present here is to be joyous. And to me, as Mark said, therefore I would wear that t-shirt anytime as well, because to be present is the greatest gift you can give to yourself and to everyone around you.
Beautiful. I love the teamwork here. I love the spiritual base. Say it again. I want to make sure I captured the quote that your spiritual teacher said to you.
He said, do not desire happiness,
right,
but happily desire the whole world.
The whole world.
And basically, when you don't desire happiness, it's your nature. When you desire the whole world, you'll actually approach it from a place of service rather than a place of grabbing.
Yes. Yeah, that's it. It's the service. It's the purpose larger than self. It's this idea that we don't become happy because we're let me see, it's a different quote by somebody, but we don't become grateful from being happy. We actually become happy from being grateful.
Yes.
Same type of idea.
Yeah.
Right?
And what happens is when you look for happiness on the outside, then you can't be glad to be here, because you either get pleasure or you get pain. Because when you don't get that, now you're in pain, because you don't want to be there. So you might get pleasure and pain from the outside, but happiness is your nature.
It's it.
Glad to be here.
Glad to be here. Yeah. Hey, we're going to make sure that we get everybody knows where to get your book. So it's called Unfear. And what's the best way people can connect with you as a company and also to get the book?
You got it. They can find us as a company at co-creationpartners.com. That's co-creation partners with no dashes. They can learn more about the book at unfearbook.com. And we're on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and indiebooks.com. So anywhere you buy books, you can find ours.
Yeah, but if you want the book really fast, I think the quickest one currently is porchlightbooks.com, because they have a bulk order sitting with them.
Oh, they do. Porchlight.
Porchlight.
Oh, that's good. And if you sell a bulk order, you get credit for each one, right? Through Porchlight. Yeah, there you go. That's good. That'll help on.
And when people order in Porchlight, they get a significant discount versus, say, on Amazon.
Oh, good heads up. See, there's a good heads up for everybody. Okay, porchlight.com. But you can go
porchlightbooks.com.
Okay, porchlightbooks.com. All right, good. Well, I want to kind of wrap with this idea of why sayings. We've had a bunch of them in this conversation. This idea of live withs. What can you leave our audience with? It could be a mantra. Okay. It could be a quote, something, it could be more than one, something that you want to leave the audience with that you live your own life by.
Yeah. So my favorite quote, which I absolutely live by, is a quote by G.K. Chesterton. And it goes, angels fly because they take themselves lightly.
Oh.
Angels fly because they take themselves lightly. And whenever I get frustrated and get caught up in my own seriousness and my own ego, I remember my 7-year-old self where everything was play and I can fly again.
Oh, that is so cool. Who was the author of that quote?
It's G.K. Chesterton. He used to be a Anglican monk back in the 1900s. So it is also.
I love that. By the way, I know you also have a company called 92 Angels. Is that not right?
Yes.
Tell me, we'll get to Mark here in a second. Tell me where that came from.
So 92 Angels is it's an angel investing company.
Yeah.
And what we are doing there is we are supporting new radical breakthrough technologies that serve the world. And 92 because I'm from the batch of 1992 from the Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad, the business school. And there were 10 of us from our batch. So we are called the 92 Angels because that's our batch number 92 is of the batch we graduated.
Oh, you're kidding me. You know, I had the rare privilege to speak at the business school at Ahmedabad. Did I say it right? Ahmedabad? Yeah. And that's one of the most renowned business schools, not only in India, it's number one, right? But in the world.
Yeah, it's in the top 10 of the world. So, it's a special place.
Oh, that is so cool. Have you had a chance to go back to India and actually do your new teachings yet?
Not since the book because of the pandemic, but I am actually starting to get invitations to do talks in India.
Good.
And I'm thinking about next summer going and doing a round of talks.
Yeah, do a tour. I did a tour there through the India Management Association, IMA. And you might want to look them up. They had what do you call it? Like YPO, little chapters all around. And that was very fruitful. And I think you'd be great at it, both of you.
That'll be super helpful. That's such a great hint. Thank you so much. Indian Management Association. Perfect.
Yeah, that's great. So Mark, what is your wisdom you want to share?
I've been reading this essay by the poet David White. It's entitled Honesty, but he basically reflects that honesty is reached through the doorway of grief and loss, and that the fear of loss in all its forms is a source of all conscious or unconscious dishonesties. And the way that speaks to me is that we all have this fear of loss. Yeah. And it's, one of those things that if we don't recognize it and see it, it's hard to be glad to be here. And so, just seeing and touching, that fear of loss is, something that's deeply human and necessary in order to live a really full, authentic life of presence.
And that's exactly what your teachings talk about, right? How to overcome that fear of loss and more of an opportunity, how to seek positivity and opportunity.
Exactly. Not to get stuck in it and collapse in it, but just to acknowledge that it's there and be okay with it.
Wow. Okay. I normally end the podcast, but we're going to go one more question because you guys got this deep connection. And that is, it gets back to the I am statement. If you think about how powerful that is, and you guys obviously talk about this, at least is what I'm picking up. How do you define yourself? If I were, say, do your I am statement, what would you say? I am what?
Mark, go for it. He froze, I think.
Yeah, I didn't freeze.
I'll tell you what. G-Man, you're going to help Mark. We're going to help Mark because these are deep questions, right? Yeah. So why don't you go first? I'm going to flip it.
So my initial thought when you asked that question was I'd probably fall into complete silence because that's my true nature. But the closest I've ever got to describing my own manifestation is to say I'm a spiritual being having a human experience.
Beautiful. Yeah. Somehow I figured a spiritual notion would come from you. That's great. Okay. Mark, you have time yet? Just check in with your heart.
Yeah. Well, I pause only because, as I've gotten deeper into this work, I've sort of realized and have experienced that anything that we append to that statement, I am, is by nature not something that I am, because it's a thought. It's a concept. Yes. And so I think that's I'll leave it with that.
Okay.
But there's all sorts of labels I would, apply to myself, whether it's husband,
Yeah.
dad, consultant, coach, facilitator, learner, CrossFitter, golfer, all that stuff. But I am, I don't need any acceptance.
No, beautiful, beautiful. It's a great question because there's two ways to look at it. From the outside world, how does the world see you? But who cares? Because that's a label that we all know is false. That's the outside, right? It's the inside. How do you define yourself that matters, right? That's what matters. So I've thought a lot about this. I sometimes, not on every podcast, ask people this because it gets you to think inward, right? And so it's funny.
So John, what's your I am?
Yeah, I was going to ask.
Okay,
Yeah,
I'm happy to share it. My audience has heard this before, but I'm happy to share it. And you're going to love this. I am an angel. Okay, that is the word I use, and it's because I was doing some reading about angels, and it turns out angels have 5 qualities. An angel's a messenger. An angel gives guidance. An angel protects. An angel's a warrior, and above all else, an angel serves others. And I said to myself when I read that, I'm not sure those are the only 5 qualities, but if they are, I'm in, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So I found a word it's a concept. It's not a word, right? That means something to me and gives me that inspiration in my heart. So I wake up and I can just say, I am an angel. And now I'm energized. I'm ready to serve others. That's the whole key.
I love that.
Beautiful.
Love that.
Love it.
Beautiful. All right, guys, this has been a real joy. I know that everyone's been listening, has gotten a lot out of it. Good luck to you guys on your consulting, your training, what you're doing out there. But above all, just thank you for the time. This has been a real blessing. I've really enjoyed this with each of you, and live the glad to be here mindset. Keep it alive.
Thank you, John. This has been such a pleasure.
Thanks, Gucci.
Glad to be here.
Glad to be here.